Let's go. All right, all right. Welcome, guys. Happy Friday. I hope you had a great Thursday. I am back. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Sabby Sabs show on Revolutionary Blackout Network. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Yeah, we have some things to talk about tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are excited for these two stories that we have for you. Shout out to everyone watching on Rockfin, YouTube, and Twitter. And let's get into it. So, what are we talking about tonight? So, tonight, I am going to discuss Russell Brand and Matt Taibbi Twitter explanation. We're going to get into the Twitter file questions that I think a lot of people have had ever since this has been released. So Matt Taibbi has had that discussion with Russell Brand. So I want you to hear this because you may get some of the answers to the questions that you've had about this situation. And I'm also going to discuss Elizabeth Warren praises Joe Biden. Yes, believe it or not, she's gone that route. She has gone that route. Let's go ahead and get started with the Elizabeth Warren story. Now, I want to give a shout out here to Case Study QB for clipping this because you guys have to see just how we had our suspicions about Elizabeth Warren. We've had things to say about her before in the past, but I think this pretty much confirms it, who Elizabeth Warren actually is. So let's go ahead and get started with this clip here from Case. So it says Elizabeth Warren on why good policy makes good politics. Let's get into it.
And Senator Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, joins me now. I've been very focused on this in thinking about the midterms and thinking about particularly this, which I think is the real telltale sign. How few Democratic incumbents lost. Not a single Democratic incumbent in the Senate, very few relative to other years in the House. Why was that? What did it have to do with the record of the bills they voted for?
Because we actually got out there, fought for working families, and delivered for working families. So even though it was just 2 years, and even though we had the skinniest possible majority in the Senate, we nonetheless, as Democrats, pulled together just enough to be able to deliver for working families. And that gave us something to run on.
So she's seriously just going to ignore the fact that the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade had nothing to do with people wanting to come out to protect a woman's right to choose. She's going to pretend that had nothing to do with it. She's going to pretend that promising to cancel a portion of student loan debt had nothing to do with it. If you look at the numbers, and we went over this before, it was actually young voters that helped Democrats win in the midterms. Young people came out in larger numbers than previously in other midterm elections that we've had. Elizabeth Warren is pretending like these bills that they passed, which is like the American Rescue Plan, they love to brag about that one. These bills that they have passed is what brought people out. I disagree with that. I think it's the two things that I just told you guys. And now what has happened? They still have not codified Roe v. Wade. In fact, Joe Biden said they're probably not going to be able to do that. And the student loan, the portion of student loan cancellation was struck down by a federal judge because Joe Biden did not do it the proper way that he was told to do it by Elizabeth Warren herself, Ayanna Pressley, and Chuck Schumer. And that was to do it through the Higher Education Act, not through the HEROES Act. So long story short, people came out, they won in the midterms, although they did lose the House. They didn't overwhelmingly lose the way that we thought they would in the midterms, because there were some promises made to voters that once again, right after the midterms, all of a sudden, nope, sorry, we can't do it. It's an old game. They've been playing it for a long time. But she's going to pretend like it's because they passed those bills
in the midterms. It really is the reminder. Good policies are good politics, because these were good policies that we were able to deliver on. As you said, climate, $35 cap on insulin for seniors. We're going to get a $2,000 cap on how much seniors spend altogether annually on prescription drugs. We're able to talk about what we tried to do for people, what we are doing on reducing student loan debt. Just one after another, 15% minimum corporate tax on billionaire corporations. You know, these are the kinds of things that are not just popular among Democrats. They're popular among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. We showed that it is possible to put government on the side of the people. And what did the Republicans do by contrast? They screamed, they yelled, they said hateful things, but they had nothing. No ideas, not even promises of how they were going to help people have more opportunity and make their lives better. The Democrats had a darn good argument in the midterms.
Could you imagine if she would have won? I don't think she had a chance of winning, but could you imagine if she would have won? Elizabeth Warren, the snake. I still call it like it is. Yes, she is still the snake. And she's bragging about crumbs. And she really thinks people are going to believe this. Now, emoji guy, that's what I call Chris Hayes, by the way. I call him emoji guy because he kind of does remind me of an emoji. The emoji with the glasses, he kind of reminds you, you know. Anywho, he's playing this game too. This is what corporate media does. They go along with the White House speaking points. They go along with the State Department. And Elizabeth Warren, she's a fraud. And I've said this a long time ago when she was running for president. I was like, Elizabeth Warren is not really progressive. If you follow her history, yeah, she has some good points, but look at her record. You have to look at how she is on paper as well. But Elizabeth Warren is basically here to run cover for Joe Biden. And let me tell you what this interview is really about. The reason why they are doing this interview is because Joe Biden right now has low poll numbers again. Right now, 70% of voters do not want Joe Biden to run for president in 2024. That's what this interview was really about, to convince the American people that Joe Biden has been doing a phenomenal job. Yes, you need him to run in 2024. You need to come out and support him again, because look at all these things that have been accomplished. That's what this is about. I just want to make that very clear. This is some type of I don't want to call it a podcast tour, but this is some type of mainstream media tour to sell Joe Biden for 2024. And she's not alone. Rokan is doing it too.
The cap on insulin and generally prescription drug prices, I saw a bunch of polling from a bunch of pollsters that said that polled, you know, at 80% or and then across the board, right? This is like genuinely, I want to just indulge me a little bit of hypothetical pushing you, because I think you're right? So I think that basically there was a kind of Venn diagram between things that were popular and that were good policies. But there's also there's a lot of stuff left on the cutting room floor. I think about this a lot. In that original Inflation Reduction Act proposal kept getting pared back.
Thank you, VSA. Look, VS Adams, I told you guys, he looks like the emoji. I told you, the little emoji with the glasses. That's what he reminds me of. Yeah.
Now, I think the vast bulk of that would have been good policy and would have been better for the country. I also think it might have precipitated more political backlash, frankly. It does seem to me there are points, and you know this as a senator, where you are trading off sometimes between what might be good policy and what might invite political backlash.
You know, I'm just not there with you on this one. I got to say, if we could have gotten universal child care, I think we'd have just had that many more people saying, I am all the way in. I want to go all the way on that. Again, because it is good policy. And that's the kind of thing we're going to be fighting for going forward. And
so let me come in here for just a second. Elizabeth Warren knew that they weren't going to get universal child care. They knew that because Joe Manchin was not on board with that. You have to have his vote. Well, at least at that time, you had to have his vote as well. They knew they weren't going to get that. I don't know how it's going to be going forward, but last time I checked, Joe Manchin is still there. Kirsten Sinema has left the Democratic Party and has declared herself an independent. She changes whichever way the wind blows. She's still corporate. Let's just keep it real. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I don't know if that bill is even going to be brought forward again, or that policy of universal child care. And this is not to say that these things that she's talking about are bad things. I'm not saying that the insulin cap is a bad thing. No, that's a good thing. But why have all of these separate, I don't know, these little incremental pieces when you can just give everybody Medicare for all? That's actually the easier way of just doing this. Just give everybody Medicare for all. And then you don't have to worry about having a separate bill to cap insulin, having a separate bill to cut the cost of prescription drugs. If we had Medicare for all, that would all be wrapped up in one bill, which is Bernie Sanders' bill, by the way. But again, I want you to understand this interview is about boosting Joe Biden so the American people will come out and vote for him again. And Elizabeth Warren knows that.
And again, it's all about delivering for people where they are, the things that make a difference. You know, for so long, the Republicans have run on the notion that government's bad, government's terrible. At best, government is inept. At worst, it's really actually doing harm. We're out there demonstrating exactly the opposite. We are showing that government can be on your side. Look right now, for example, on inflation. What do people across this country understand is one of the major causes of higher prices? Price gouging. And for the first time in what feels like forever, I mean, decades and decades, we actually have an FTC and a Department of Justice that are trying to enforce the antitrust laws and really going after companies that are engaged in price gouging,
Okay, so she's also just going to sit like here and pretend like the war with Russia and Ukraine has nothing to do with it either. She's going to pretend like that has nothing to do with the inflation, that has nothing to do with the reason why gas prices were high. By the way, I know Joe Biden keeps bragging about this on Twitter. We cut the gas prices. It really depends on where you live. I mean, I live in Massachusetts. The gas is still expensive to me. Sorry, I still remember what it was before the war happened. So she's just going to pretend like it's all because of price gouging. That's part of the problem. But the other part of that problem is this conflict with Russia and Ukraine. And for Elizabeth Warren to leave that out of the conversation, it's nefarious in a way. You cannot leave that aside, especially with this aspect of the Nord 2, the pipeline. I told you guys this a couple of days ago. My friend in the UK said he doesn't even know if they're going to have heat this winter. That's all. This is all connected. The pipeline, the war, the inflation. It's not just because of price gouging. So people have to really understand that.
After this enormous concentration that has happened in industry after industry after industry. And this is one, even if people on Capitol Hill don't always get it, I guarantee the President of the United States gets it and the people across this country get it.
Final question for you is on
what I tell you. I told you she was going to slip him in there somewhere. She was going to slip him in there somewhere.
Jay Powell, the chair of the Fed. You've been critical of him, particularly the regulatory parts of his stewardship of the Fed. You, I think, objected to his renomination. It was fairly controversial. I was always sort of a little ambivalent because I think he did a pretty good job on the monetary policy lever during the pandemic. He gave a speech today that was basically, to summarize, we're not stopping until we put this economy into recession. That's certainly how it sounded to me. And you have been very critical, but I got to say, what was going through your head as you heard him basically announce, we're going to do whatever we can to make sure more people are out of work?
Okay, let me cut in here for just a second and explain. So this gentleman here, He is in charge of the Federal Reserve. So that's what they're referring to. We talked about this I think it was like a week or two ago. We talked about this, or I might have been more than a week ago. Yes, where the Federal Reserve, that they had announced that they were going to increase interest rates in order to get us out of this inflation. A lot of this is BS, by the way. You can easily fix this problem just by minting a coin, which is what MMT would tell you, monetary modern theory. The president knows that. And when I talked to, the guys over at Real Progressives, I did ask them, do any of the politicians in DC know about this idea? The fact that the Treasury and the Secretary can come together and they can mint a coin and you can wipe all of this out. And I was told, yes, they do. And specifically that one person in particular, Rokana, knows about it. So this idea that the Federal Reserve has to come in and we have to raise the interest rates so that we can kind of get out of this, or we're headed into the recession, which I would say we're already in a recession, but whatever. This is really interesting because they know that the easiest way out of this is to mint a coin. They can mint a coin. It can wipe out the student loan debt. That can wipe out the rest of this inflation and take care of all of that. They don't want to do that because they serve corporate interests. If they were to do that, their corporate donors would not be pleased. You see, Goldman Sachs wouldn't like that. Wells Fargo would not like that. BlackRock wouldn't like that. Vanguard wouldn't like that. Bank of America would not like that. That's why they won't do it. They'd rather let the American people struggle, They'd rather let us suffer and do this the hard way. And you would think that from 2008, we would have learned something. Those of you who were born during that time, or around during that time. If you remember the housing crisis of 2008, some of you may sit back and wonder, how the hell could we get here again? This is where we're headed. It's not just the banks. It's not just the inflation. The housing market is also taking a hit. I think I'm going to do a separate stream about that, to be honest. I think I'm going to do a separate stream about the housing market because I've talked about it a little bit here and there, but there's a lot more I need to go into. But for those of us that remember 2008, it was a tough time. Similar things, high gas prices, the food prices were high. People were getting evicted. People lost their homes. Similar thing. But for this gentleman here to come in and say, we're just going to keep raising the interest rates. Where are we supposed to get all this money from to pay these high interest rates? Where all this money supposed to come from if people aren't getting raises? And then the same people want to complain about the workers going on strike. I'm tired of all these strikes. I'm getting tired of this. If you're not giving them a pay increase and the interest rates are increasing and gas is still expensive for some people, depending on where you live, and the grocery store prices are still high, how are you supposed to keep up with inflation? I'm telling you, I really think they just want to weed all of us out. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, because that's exactly it. Can we just do the translation? When he says, I want to cool off the economy and we want to see a rise in the unemployment rate, my question back to him is just exactly how many people, how many millions of people do you want to see fired before you stop engaging in these extraordinary interest rate hikes that he has been doing? And, here's the thing you have to remember.
Let's talk for a second about the unemployment rate. I would argue that the unemployment rate is actually higher than they say that it is, because let me explain to you how this works. When the unemployment rate is calculated, number one, it is calculated keeping in mind people who have actually filed for unemployment and have been approved for it. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of the unemployment rate, guess what? If you're an adult and you still live with your parents, but you don't have a job, guess what? You are not factored in the unemployment rate. And there's a lot of people in that situation. where they live with their parents or they lost their job. They had to move back in with their parents. They graduated from college, but they couldn't find a job yet. They had to move back in with their parents. They're not factored into the unemployment rate, you guys. So I always argue that the unemployment rate is actually higher than what they are telling you. And you also have to keep in mind as well, back in September last year, remember, Joe Biden kicked all those people off of unemployment. That's why they were able to brag and say, we have record low unemployment numbers. And they would leave out the fact that they kicked all these people off on Labor Day. Just something to keep in mind.
The Fed just has this one tool,
That's all they
raise
got.
interest rates. And yet there are a whole lot of things that are causing prices to go up. We know that the pandemic, we know supply chain kinks, we know that price gouging, but we also know that raising interest rates, for example, is not going to bring down the cost of housing. It sure doesn't make it easier for somebody trying to buy their first house. And it doesn't make it easier for builders to come in and build new housing, which is what we need to bring those prices down. So
I can tell you in my state, so I live in Massachusetts, and I can tell you in my state, there's not that many people building new houses. And that didn't start this year. It's been that way as long as I've lived here, and I've lived here for 11 years. That just doesn't happen much. You have to go further west in the state to see that happen. And even there, like, it's just not. A lot of the homes are old homes, and it's hard to find a single family home. The only reason we were able to find a single family home that we could afford was because when the pandemic hit, they reduced the interest rate so low. We were like, oh, snap. This is our chance. This is our moment. This is our moment. It's a good thing we took that opportunity because we wouldn't be able to do it today. Now the housing prices are expensive again. This house is expensive again. We wouldn't be able to buy it today. So there's that reality as well. But it's interesting to me that she goes on to say, well, people wouldn't be able to buy a home because the high interest rates. People weren't able to buy a home before all of this. Before all of it, they just couldn't. And Elizabeth Warren is from my state. Okay? She lives here in Massachusetts. She is one of my representatives. She knows this. That's what's interesting to me. She knows. The woman knows. Let me back up just a little bit.
we also know that raising interest rates, for example, is not going to bring down the cost of housing. It sure doesn't make it easier for somebody trying to buy their first house. And it doesn't make it easier for builders to come in and build new housing, which is what we need to bring those prices down. So I just keep trying to remind him there is a difference between landing a plane and crashing a plane.
And particularly after yesterday,
with the big increases.
The picture, yesterday's data made a soft landing seem possible, and I hope that we can get there. Senator Elizabeth Warren, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Me too.
There's a difference between landing a plane and crashing a plane, she said, right? It's funny to me because she's pretending like he doesn't know that. He knows that. He knows exactly what he's doing. He is playing his role. Again, corporate interest comes first. We, the people, do not come first. And I think the sooner people understand that, the better. The better off you'll be. Thank you so much for the super chat, Roger Meadows. Chuck admitted to me he knows minting coin solution. So Roger Meadows is referring to Chuck Schumer because Roger's in New York. That's his representative. So Chuck Schumer knows about minting the coin. Where's the bill for that, Chuck? Where's the bill for minting the coin? Very interesting. I told you guys, some of them know. Some of them know. Let me check Rockfin really quick. Want to go ahead and bring that up. All right, let me go ahead and share comments on Rockfin. It's the rock to the fin. It's the rock to the fin. Rock to the fin. Rock to the fin. All right, all right. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin. Roger, I'm going to make this a little bit larger because I can't. Okay. Speaking of universal childcare, if we narrowed the income inequality gap through measures like empowering workers in the workplace via co-ops, setting minimum wage permanently above the cost of living, government jobs guaranteed with a starting wage set above COL, giving one parent monthly a $6,000 check to stay home to care for kids, outlaw private equity from owning housing, we would need universal child care. Well said, Roger Meadows. Well said. Good points. All good points. Thank you so much for the super chat. What it do? Bring Ryan Grimm back to discuss the oust union head. I think, look, I think Ryan gets it. I think Ryan gets it, but I think Ryan is doing his job, which is to protect them. To protect them. So, and I think we might need to. What just happened? Oh, sorry, that started playing again. I think we might need to take a break from I think Ryan needs a break. I'm sorry, but like he's kind of been like everybody has oh boy, everybody's kind of come after him now. So I think we could take a break. All right. Okay. We're going to get into the second story here about Matt Taibbi and Russell Brand. Now, I do want to tell you guys, if you haven't had the opportunity to do so, there was a discussion with Matt Taibbi on Call-In on David Soretta's show called The Lever. So that's also on Call-In. I listened to that discussion before I watched this interview. And I recommend that you listen to that discussion when you have time, okay? Because there's some things said there that are not said here and vice versa. So, what's up, Rome? Hello, Moto. Ryan needs a haircut. I think he had a haircut. Rome. Oh, guys, be nice. But basically what they get to here, some of the questions that some of us have had, like, how did he acquire the files? You know, what exactly did they find? Is it true that they only found data that confirmed that it was conservatives that were being shadow banned, etc.? Matt gets into that. Matt is also being heavily smeared. I talked about this last night, and not just by people who are liberal, but he's also being smeared by some progressives and some leftists as well ever since he took on this assignment. I do want to be very clear. I hope I have time to play it. If I can find it quickly, hopefully I'll get to that point where he discusses that he was not paid for this. I think that's something that's important for people to hear, because there's been a lot of people making these talking points where you took money from, well, now the second richest man in the world. It's the same PR talking point that's been going all around Twitter and some shows as well. And Matt Taibbi did confirm on that podcast with David Sirota that he was not paid for this by Twitter. So just keep that in mind. I think that's important for people to understand. Let's go ahead and get into it. Russell Brand and Matt Taibbi. Let's go.
Me, Russell Brand. We're talking about the nature of propaganda and the nature of truth. And I suppose that leads us to real investigative journalism. And as sure as day follows night, you can't mention investigative journalism without perhaps uttering the names that rhyme with baby and maybe. Yes, it's Matt Taibbi. Matt, thanks for joining us. It's so lovely to see you.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Russell.
Well, we're here and we're angry with you. We're angry and we're jealous that you've been making all these revelations and you've been carrying on. Can you tell me firstly how it unfolded, your relationship with Elon Musk, and how he told you that he wanted you to release these files?
Well, that part of it's complicated because I agreed from the start to a general attribution, which is sources at Twitter. So the story of how I got the story, I got to just leave it at that. But I can tell you about interactions with Elon Musk. he's. It's funny. I've had a lot of. I've probably done tens of thousands of interviews. I mean, thousands at least of interviews in my life, and there's always this uncomfortable moment when you ask to turn on the tape recorder or the recorder, because the person's always afraid that you're gonna, catch them. This is the first time that I looked in somebody's eyes and I could tell they legitimately just did not give a fuck at all. Whether or not I was recording, like what I was going to write. And I was explicitly told I could write anything I wanted. And we haven't seen anything or.
Okay, I want to take this moment to say, make sure you hit that like button, guys. I do forget to say this sometimes, so thank you so much for those of you who remind me in the chat. Make sure you hit that like button, but I also want to chime in here because I want to make a point. Oh, let me go back. He just said what he was allowed to write about. This part is important.
This is the first time that I looked in somebody's eyes and I could tell they legitimately just did not give a fuck at all. Whether or not I was recording, like what I was going to write. And I was explicitly told I could write anything I wanted. And we haven't seen anything or run into anything that suggests otherwise.
Okay, that answers some of the questions, or one of the questions that I know a lot of people did have. Like, I covered these Twitter file releases like on my show, on my channel. And one of the questions that kept coming up was he allowed to write about what he wanted? So he just answered that question, that he was told that he could write about what he wants. So there's that one. Let's go on.
So
he's a pretty unique individual with obviously, like all comparable outlets, spent a lot of time considering Elon Musk, contemplating his unique cultural space, the fact that he's part Donald Trump, part Willy Wonka, part Richard Branson, part Steve Jobs, part disruptor. And I know that part of the, oh gosh, I don't want to gratify them by using the word backlash, but you have, subsequent to making these revelations, you've been accused of being something of a kind of, I don't know, left-wing apostate. What like the idea is that Elon Musk is the sort of representative of a new sort of right-wing type of rhetoric and political perspective, and that you haven't made any revelations about a sort of shadow banning of left-wing figures. And why is that, Matt?
Okay, this is another question that I kept receiving. Why hasn't Matt Taibbi said anything about shadow banning or suppression of left-wing accounts? I'm going to go as far as to say by left-wing, we're talking progressive leftists here. I'm not talking about no liberals. I hate when people use those terms interchangeably. They're not the same thing. But listen to what Matt says, because again, this was another popular question that I kept receiving when I did cover this story. Here we go.
Because we haven't seen it yet. We're looking for it. And I think one of the misperceptions that people have is that we're sitting in front of a terminal that has global access to everything. And if that were the case, we'd be searching for all kinds of names. And but the data sets that we've looked for evidence in the other direction of, let's just say, requests from the Trump White House to get this person or that person banned. I was told that by human sources, so I felt obligated to put that in one of the threads, but we're not seeing that in the document, so I can't write about it. And I think everybody would say the same thing, which is, like, I don't care. Like, if it's interesting, I'll put it out there. But what we're seeing so far in these documents is not suggesting a whole lot of that. Let's put it that way.
I am going to pull up that call in from David Sirota, because this is what I was trying to tell you guys. On the call in with David Sirota, there's more said. It's a longer segment, and there's more. It goes a little bit deeper. I'm not sure when this video was recorded, the lever, because I can tell you the date that this interview took place with Russell Brand, but I don't know when the interview was actually recorded. That's the problem. Sometimes you can record a video and You don't post that video until like 2 days later, some people a week later, right? Some people are on like a schedule. And so I'm not sure, but the show with, I'm gonna pull it up. Let me finish the video and I'm gonna get to that call.
The most interesting revelations, or the most scintillating at least, appear to be the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, Twitter having a secret blacklist, and the removal of Donald Trump and trying to create a unique case for the removal of a sort of a political figure. But you believe that the most important thing is the relationship between law enforcement, government, and social media. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, and that was the thing that I was really most interested headed into this project was, I think a lot of people have questions. How involved is the government in monitoring and censoring the speech of ordinary people? What we've seen so far already, and we have definite conclusive proof of, is that there are lots and lots of reports where we see Twitter executives saying things like, DHS flagged this, the FBI flagged this, and then there's a whole thread where they decide what to do about it. Do we remove it? Do we put a label on it? So there's tons of that stuff where they're clearly getting communications from the FBI. We also know that they have meetings, not just with the FBI and the DHS, but also a surprise was the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. I hadn't heard that before. That was a new one.
Okay, you guys see what's happening, right? See, this is exactly what Mark Zuckerberg kind of let the cat out the bag when he admitted this on Joe Rogan's podcast, when he was talking about Facebook was told by the FBI, you have to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story, right? So they use the algorithm to do so. Now you are hearing also from Matt Taibbi that not only was the FBI telling Twitter what to suppress, what to kind of like shadow ban, but also apparently the intelligence agency, and they had meetings with them, you guys. There were meetings with them. It's not like they just sent like an email and said, hey, can you suppress this? They actually were meeting with them. How does it make you feel to know that alphabet letter agencies are controlling what can be said, what should be suppressed, and what should be shadow banned on these platforms? How exactly does that make you feel? Doesn't make me feel safe. Makes me feel a little suspect. Part of me sitting here wondering if they're watching me right now. It's strange. It's bizarre. Like, honestly, I want you to understand that when you go onto these social media platforms, this is not like a town square. That's how it's advertised. Yeah, Facebook, you can communicate with all your friends. Find your friends from high school. That's how I found a lot of my friends from high school years later. Find your friends from high school. Stay in touch, even though you're far away. You can form little groups, Facebook groups, community groups. Same thing with Twitter. Twitter, go ahead and tweet. Tell us what's going on. You can join a Twitter space and hang out with people in your community and your group. That's how it's advertised. But what you have to understand is that this is not a town square. These social sites, in my opinion, is just another way, and no shade to the creators, because when they created these platforms, that's not what they wanted to do. But these social platforms are just another way for the government to keep tabs on what the hell we're doing that we think they don't know we're doing. And just because your account is set to private doesn't mean they still can't see it. I tried to tell people this about Facebook years ago. My Facebook account is set to private. Nobody can see my information unless they're my friend. And then I would see employers reject applicants because they would look up their social media history, even those private accounts. There's ways around that. So be careful about what you say on those platforms, because it could come back to haunt you. If it's not something you want other people to see, I would be careful saying it. And that goes for those DM groups as well. And I've told people this: what you think is a private message is not a private message when it comes to the US government. They can pull that shit too. Sorry. Some of you right now sitting back and you're like, ooh, what did I put in that DM? It's not private. If we learned anything from Edward Snowden, we need to know it's not private.
And then we're learning a lot about the kind of scraping of raw intelligence and fire hosing it to the government, all kinds of government agencies on the back end. So the government is harvesting tons of information from these companies and then turning around and spitting it back to companies like Twitter in the form of requests for, maybe bannings, maybe shadow bans, maybe deletions or labels and that sort of thing. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating because I suppose back in the utopian early days of online spaces, I think what all of us understood is that a new territory had emerged. And like any territory, it could become democratized. It could become a tool of connection, a revolutionary tool, something that would finally usurp the monopolized media spaces and their ongoing support of a elitist agenda, for want of a better phrase. But what has happened is that expertly the social media spaces themselves have been corporatized and corralled, and what you have demonstrated through these revelations, through your revelations, is just examples of that in practice, that these spaces are no longer free spaces. They are managed and controlled spaces. They're not organic. And the idea that social media could be used to create insurrections, even if they're ideological insurrections rather than sort of actual social revolutions, is being quite strongly prohibited.
Yes. Did you hear what he just said? In the chance of a social revolution is being prohibited. Do you see what's happening here? Russell Brand gets this point. Now, all the people that say we can organize, online and create a revolution. No, you cannot. They see all of this. You have to understand. They see all of it. They are going to know where you're going to be before you even get there. They know. And I'm going to add this in too before we get back to what Matt says. I want to add this piece in because I think this is important for people to hear as well. Other platforms I think you need to be cautious of. Slack, these Slack groups, these Slack channels that people are in, those aren't safe either. I've had Slack for work. I can tell you it's not safe. People can get that information as well. Slack, Zoom, these Zoom meetings that people do, that information can be pulled too. Just because someone is not in the meeting with you at that point in time doesn't mean they don't have a way of getting it. Zoom had a class action lawsuit last year because information from their meetings was leaked. Be careful, especially with Slack. I don't know why people think there's so many people tell me, oh, Slack is so much safer. No, it's not. It's not. I don't know. Maybe we might have to go back to the old way when we used to write notes to each other, write letters, call people. Oh, they can listen to those too. Go visit people in person, the old way.
Yeah, I think the thing that we were shocked by was the degree of idiosyncratic control over the visibility of every single user, account, hashtag. They have a whole universe of stuff that they can do to any single account. They can dial it all the way down to you cannot be searched. And then from there are like countless gradations of things that they can do, all the way up to your account will not trend. Only people who follow you can see you. Even people who follow you won't see you unless they search. Like there's a whole list of stuff. So they have absolute control over the visibility of basically everything.
And I want to add this point too in reference to searching for accounts. So I've seen this happen as well, not just on Twitter, but I've seen it happen on YouTube. There are a couple people, I want to call them out on here because I won't put them on blast like that. But there are a couple of channels that I know for a fact are shadow banned on YouTube. Because anytime I type in your full channel name, no spelling errors, and you still don't pop up, but someone whose channel isn't even spelled the same as yours appears? There are certain people who are also suppressed on YouTube, not just Twitter. And you have to ask yourself this, and we talked about this before last year on RBN. Look at who trends on Twitter. Why is that? Why is it? I remember one time Nick had a tweet go viral. Nick was not trending on Twitter, but someone else can have less likes and retweets and views for their tweet, and because of who they are, they go viral. You know, like, I want to be very clear. It is not normal for Vosh to go viral or to trend on Twitter every week. For a while, that was happening. And it's one or two things that can happen, right? So like, if someone's constantly talking about you on Twitter, that can make you trend. But if I'm searching on Twitter now and I search your name, it said that you were trending, and I go search your name and I don't see that many tweets mentioning your name, how are you trending on Twitter? I'm sorry, but it's obvious at this point. So there are certain people that Twitter will push up in the algorithm, and there are certain people that they will suppress. And YouTube does the same thing.
And we haven't learned a lot about amplification of accounts yet, because that appears to be another side of the company. But in terms of cutting it down, dialing it down, we're learning a lot about that.
So presumably much of the angst about Elon Musk's acquisition was that he was visibly and palpably not a compliant figure like Zuckerberg or other oligarchs in the space. It isn't on board ideologically with the project. We know that sort of Zuckerberg wrote to Fauci, and they're just sort of like, how can I be of any assistance type way? So if this is happening at Twitter, obviously the assumption is that similar programs are operating throughout the social media world, and another space that we are sort of taught to regard as neutral is in fact a highly managed space that's curated and potentially, as you say, amplified where necessary. We would assume it's true at Facebook, we'd assume it's true elsewhere.
Yeah, and we've seen evidence of the conversations within Twitter about what they do at other platforms. So you're right about that. I think it's a safe assumption that every single one of the major platforms has basically the same arrangement with the government, and we can't say definitely exactly how it works yet, but I'm assuming, I think it's a safe supposition that there's probably something similar to what's going on Twitter at the other platforms as well.
What'd I tell you? All of them. Be careful with Discord too. All of them. I'm telling you. I am telling you. Rome says, I've been shadow banned for about a year now. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Bill says, I mean, the Twitter file shows a lot of it was just a human, not even an algorithm. Those 5,000 people the company doesn't miss were doing something. I'm telling you guys, we used to tell people these things. People are like, you guys are exaggerating. I'm like, no, like, we knew this was happening. I saw someone mention one of the channels in the chat. I didn't want to put people on blast, but let me see if I can find you back. I thought I starred that one. Did I not hit star? I'm so bad at this. I'm bad at like starring the shoot. Brandy Dean said, Gray Zone is one that won't pop up sometimes on YouTube. I have to spell it out complete. That's one of the ones. That's one of the ones. They're not the only one. There's some other ones too that I notice. And it really doesn't make any sense. I'm like, nobody notices this is happening. Let's play a little bit more, Matt. I can't play the whole interview because I do want to show you what he said on David Sirota's show as well. I might have to do a part 2 vid to this because there's so much information.
It's just Twitter is a different animal than the other platforms. Like, for instance, one of the things we were told is that you can't get sort of a viral outbreak of political activity as quickly, say, on YouTube, because people have to physically sit down and watch the video. On Twitter, it can happen in seconds, in microseconds, which is one of the reasons why they pay such close attention to every single thing that happens on the platform.
What will Elon Musk's actual ability to deny this kind of access to those sorts of agencies be? And I know this is speculative, and I certainly wouldn't expect you to put your relationship in jeopardy, but how distinct, so firstly, how much is Elon Musk likely to oppose the previous regime's relationship? And how different is Elon Musk's agenda likely to be, given that many of his economic relationships are going to be sort of comparable?
All right, we're gonna have to come back to that one, that piece, because I had already talked about that at some point, because I showed people what Elon Musk was saying in a Twitter space that I was in about the future of Twitter. But I want to show this. I really want to share this from the call-in segment, because I want you guys to hear what was said. Because Matt Taibbi wasn't too happy with some of the line of questioning, which honestly, I don't blame him. Now, again, this episode was what's actually happening at Twitter with Matt Taibbi, and it was David Sirota's show, The Lever. And I want you to just hear this. I think I'm at the right spot.
Keeping it quick. Matt, can you give us are you at liberty to give us a vague idea of how scarce time with the documents themselves, time with access to the databases is for you and other journalists? Because when it comes to prioritizing which top
9 days, and I stuck that in there. But you know, I just haven't seen a lot of it yet. We have the ability to go back and start doing searches again. Then that's going to be one of the priorities. Let's put it that way. I'm kind of looking in a different direction right now, but that is something that's like on the table that we want to do. At least a handful to try to understand, get some visibility into what's happening with those accounts. Now, in terms of Barry's stuff,
let me go back just a little bit so he can tell you. I want you to hear what he said before that. Sorry.
Well, firstly, I'm Team Matt on this one. I don't care if the devil himself gave you access to those things. I want to know what's in them. Wing accounts like even Rose McGowan have been hardcore suppressed at various times by Twitter. And I think
and start doing searches again, then that's going to be kind of higher court. I don't even know how to explain this. It's like the Supreme Court of censorship at Twitter. It's called SIP-PES. I forget what that stands for. I have to go back and look. It's like site integrity something. And it's a very small group of people who look at very high profile cases that are controversial and involve people with lots of follower accounts. And these cases are so sensitive that people like Vijay Gadde and Yoel Roth, like senior executives, they deleted some of their decisions on the way out. So we were only able to see probably about 50% of the decisions, maybe less than that. But I would say virtually all of the accounts that I saw, and I didn't look as long as Barry did. I was only briefly in the room for that period of the interview. They were pretty much all conservatives. Now that.
So you see, even on this call-in segment, he said most of the accounts that were suppressed or shadow banned were conservatives. Now, again, like he was asked also in this segment about what about topics like Assange, what about anti-war like voices, what about Palestine, that kind of thing. He didn't really see that. Like basically what he was saying during this segment, there's a couple of things that came up, but he did mention that I guess they're going to go back through this again. They're going to go back and do another look to see if that has happened as well. But hold on, let me see.
That might be because those there were more conservatives who were engaging in activity that resulted in a violation. But those high-profile cases were almost all on the right. I saw names like Ben Shapiro in there. They ultimately decided not to do anything with him. But I didn't, like, for instance, I didn't see a left-leaning account that we didn't report on. So I hope that answers your question. I do understand that people are really, really intensely interested in that subject, and every time I've seen something like that, for instance, I saw a decision about suspending the World Socialist website for 9 days, and I stuck that in there.
That was one of the ones I wanted you guys to hear, the World Socialist website. And I mentioned to you guys a couple days ago on my show that I knew that website was suppressed because I had never heard about them until someone actually sent it to me. So in reference to like people on the left, he does confirm that the World Socialist website was one of the ones that was recommended for suspension, like that kind of thing. Let me go back a little bit more because I just want to make sure.
Probably aware there was a bit of a speed bump at the beginning when we discovered that the former general counsel of the FBI and Twitter's deputy general counsel was actually reviewing the material that I was looking at before I got it.
Okay, that was the piece I wanted you guys to hear. That's why I was like, no, I got to pull this up. That Twitter's general counsel for the FBI actually reviewed the material before Matt Taibbi got it. That is very important for you guys to hear. It was already reviewed before he got it. So take that as you may. Do what you want with that. But that's why I told you, if you have Callin, if you don't have the app, you can listen to it on the computer now too. Go to the lever on Callin, and the name of that episode is called What's Actually Happening at Twitter with Matt Taibbi. I listened to the whole thing. The discussion at some point got a little heated too, because people were like, why are you doing this for the second richest man in the world? That PR talking point shit. Sorry. It's just, oh my God. But yeah, so that's important for people to know. Want to go ahead to some of the comments because I think I missed Steve. Thank you for the super chat, Steve. Sabby, have Dr. Joe Firestone on your show. He's trying to start a dump the corruption movement. I believe he has been on and had that discussion. Either he came on or I went on there. I forget. I have to go back and check, but we've had that conversation. But thanks, Steve. Eric says, I think Taibbi is a good journalist, but I worry that Musk is withholding data from him. Well, I told you guys, and I said this on Fault Lines as well. There's no way there's no people on the left. But again, the material that he received, he can only report on what he received. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, guys, I have to head out, but go ahead and hit that like button if you don't mind there, honey buns. Thank you so much. That does help us with the algorithm. And if you do want to see me again, I will be live again tonight in about an hour on my channel. I have a couple of stories as well as a breaking news story that is not on this thumbnail because it happened after I picked my stories. Go figure. But I'm going to be talking about Chris Hedges and Richard Wolff, inflation. I'm going to talk about Charlie Baker, crazy news. That's my outgoing governor here with a huge announcement. We're also going to talk about Joe Biden getting pressure in reference to rent increases in the country. And we're going to talk about the UCLA strike. Something else has happened with that, and breaking news. So you may have already seen it already, actually. See, this is what happened when you stream in the evening. Sometimes people have already seen these stories, but whatever, it is what it is. All right, guys, I do hope. Oh, don't forget Rockfin. I got one more Rockfin comment. Hit the like on your way out. Hit the like. Hit the like. Hit the like. Hit the like. That could be a song. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger Meadows. How insulted Shapiro must feel that they felt he wasn't even worth their time. I know. Bye, Rome. All right, guys. You know how we do this. I'm sorry, it's kind of funny. You know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.